What does the name Kush mean?
Well, Kush, in its original form, is a biblical name. Kush was the grandson of Noah. If you recall, the great flood happened and delineated beginning in chapter 6 of the book of Genesis, culminating in chapter 9. And thereafter, there's a listing of Noah's sons and their sons. So Noah has 3 sons. One of them is Ham. The word Ham suggests hot. It suggests, many theologians believe that it means black. So some believe that Noah's 3rd son was black, but of course, if Noah's son was black, then by deduction we know that Noah might have been black. That's another conversation. But Kush means black. It literally means black. That's, if you look up the definition, it means black. So that's the first time that we see this word written anywhere in history, whether it be religious history or secular history, but that's what the name means.
Where in the world did Kush exist?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kush existed in northeast African, what is today parts of southern Egypt, and the entirety of what is modern day Sudan, and parts of Ethiopia, so northeast Africa.
Who are the descendants of the Kushites?
Well, the descendants of the Kushites are the people that live in the country of Sudan and South Sudan. Actually, Sudan was one country for quite some time. Most recently, like within perhaps the last 12 years, more give or take, it was divided into two separate countries. But then also you have to take into consideration that the story of humanity is one of continuous migration. We draw lines in the sand and we say this is this country, but in reality, the more salient and lasting connections are the tribes. So there were different tribes that made up the country of Sudan and that made up the country or the nation or the empire of Kush. Those tribes are still very much in existence, and some of them have migrated back south. For example, the Lua, which is an interesting African tribe that is migrated back to Kenya, Uganda, and have situated themselves around Lake Victoria. So they're in different places, but largely in modern-day Sudan.
How did the Kushite Empire come to an end?
Well, there are many reasons. I mean, your typical reasons: division, tension between the emperors or the kings or the Kandakis, and who are the rulers, and the priests. There was always this tension, as it was in the case of Kemet, between the secular rulers, which were the kings and the emperors, and the religious rulers, the priests. So there was that internal strife and tension that contributed to it. And Cush's neighbors, Cush's opponents or enemies took note of that. But then there was also tension that existed externally in terms of Aksum, who was an emerging empire that came into existence somewhere around 100 BC and reached its zenith or apex right around 350 AD. They were contending and contesting with Kush for these valuable trade routes that led to the Red Sea, which was largely where Kush derived its wealth and its influence in the world by controlling those trade routes. But the Aksumite army and the Aksumite people in 350 AD, somewhere in there, went to war with them and vanquished them. And that was the beginning of the end for the empire of Kush.
What would you say are some of the greatest accomplishments of the Kushite Empire?
They were known as the land of the bow. And they were known for their military prowess. Talked about this in other postings. They went to battle with every world power that existed in their 2,700 to 3,000 year existence. That's pretty amazing all by itself, the fact that this empire existed for roughly 3,000 years. But in that 3,000 year period, they went to battle with every major empire and won at some point. I want you to think about that. They won against Rome. They won against Kemet on multiple occasions. They won against Greece. They won against Persia. They won at some point against Assyria. So they won battles and they lost battles, but I think the fact that they had staying power. And then also I think what was amazing about Kush is that they knew when to fold the tent and move to another location. So if you know at the beginning of Kush's secular history, their capital is in a place called Kerma. And it's a very well-developed, well-laid-out, defined civilization. Streets, roads, temples, government buildings, houses, wells, cemeteries, all of the things, the modern trappings of a developed city they had at Kerma. But because there was this continual back and forth between between Kemet and Kush, at some point they decided to move their capital further to their second location, which was Napata. And then, of course, there were issues later with that capital, and they moved further south to a place called Meroe. And that was their last capital. So there are many amazing things. I talked in recent times about the fact that 9,000 years ago, in a place called Napata, they were studying the stars. They were accurately measuring the distance between the planets. We're talking about some very intelligent, very well-rounded, very intellectual, secularly balanced, religiously balanced, socially balanced individuals 9,000 years ago. They developed the first 365-day calendar. So there are just many, many different accomplishments. I can't point to one. These are amazing people worthy of our study and certainly worthy of much more research. A lot of focus has been placed on Egypt or Kemet, and a lot of excavation has been done, and some amazing finds have been made regarding the brilliance and the accomplishments and achievements of Kemet. But 1/3 or 1/10 of the story hasn't been told regarding Kemet. Partly because of, let's face it, cultural bias. No one really wants to know, the Western world really doesn't want to know about the brilliance, about the intelligence, about the accomplishments of these African people, because that further erodes the narrative that the Western world has always been superior and the ones who've led the way to society. So there's a lot yet to be known, and I look forward to learning.
Who are some of the most notable leaders of Kush?
Well, I can think about a couple. Alara. Alara is the king. Alara and Kashta were the Kushite kings who established what is called the 25th dynasty. And what you need to understand about the 25th dynasty of Egypt, or Kemet, is that it was the first dynasty. It was all Africans. So Egypt had a total of 30 dynasties throughout its 3,000-year existence. A dynasty is the rule of a family. So, for example, if I'm the king and then I give the torch to my son and he rules, and then he gives it to his son, and then he gives it to his son. But then Joe, who's not in the family line, comes in and takes over and sets up a kingdom. Then he is now a new dynasty. So there were 30 families over the course of 3,000 years that ruled Kemet. But the 25th dynasty was African, was Kushites that rose up and began to rule their former oppressors. When black people talk about our slave experience in America and the West, we talk about the fact that we were enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. We make that comparison to the Hebrews who were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. But the Kushites were colonized and oppressed by the Egyptians for 500 years. At the end of that 500 years, they rose up and they showed them how to practice their religion better than they practiced their religion, how to execute their science better than they executed their science. And they ruled Kemet for 100 years. But the beginning of that was, the vision to do that was Kashta and Alara. The one who actually went physically to Kemet to fight in a military battle was Pianke, also known as Pi. So he's a pretty significant character as well. Now, if you know something about that time, the Egyptians and the Kushites shared one thing in common, that was that they both believed in the god Amun-Ra. So at times the priest was as powerful as the pharaoh. At other times the priest was actually more powerful. So the priest and the priestess were powerful people. One of the things that Kashta did is send his daughter to become the god wife of Amun, which is a way of saying the high priest. And in that position, she held spiritual and political sway over the national affairs of Egypt. So the black Kushite god's wife of Amun was Amun-Ra. The historians tell us that, Kushite historians tell us that Amun-Ra was sent to Memphis, which is where the place where the temples were at that time, somewhere between the ages of 14 and 17. She's a child when she goes there. If you can imagine that, the trip is roughly 700 miles away from her home in Napata. But she grows into her own and she becomes this powerful, significant, beautiful, intelligent, capable ruler within the realm of spiritual things. So that kind of ties into something that I think is important to know. That in the Kushite structure of governance, women played an equal role in terms of being able to step into positions of power, both in terms of religious structure and also in terms of political structure. We've talked about Amun-Ra, the god's wife of Amun, and now that takes me to a political figure, which is the Amani-Reines. Amani-Reines is celebrated as the most significant Kandaki. Kandaki is a title, it's not a name. The Western rendering of that name is Candace. If you know someone named Candace, now you know where the name comes from. It's not a Western name, it's an African name. It means ruler, woman of influence. The Kandaki started out being the mother of the king, but ultimately they began to rule in their own right. The most celebrated Kandaki is Amani-Reines, who was a warrior. She wasn't just a ruler, she went to battle with her troops, and in fact is, legend says that she lost one eye in a battle. But historical facts also tell us that she went to battle with Rome and prevailed and fought them essentially to a draw, to the point where they negotiated with her a peace treaty in which Kush came out essentially better off than it went into the struggle. So Pi, Amanirenas, Armornerdus, Kashta, Pianke. One of the other persons that is mentioned both in secular history as well as biblical history is Taharka. Taharka, when he was about 20 years old, he was sent by the Kushite king to assist Judea, who was facing invasion from Assyria. At that time, Assyria was the most powerful empire on planet Earth. It's recorded in, I believe, the book of Isaiah, as well as, I believe, either Second Kings chapter 18, it might be First Kings, but I think it's Second Kings chapter 18. You do the research yourself. But so this man is referred to as an Ethiopian, by the way. That's an interesting thing that we can straighten out. So when the Bible uses the term Ethiopia, it's not talking about the country that exists in the Horn of Africa today. It's talking about anyone that's black, okay? Anyone that has color, skin color that looks like mine. In the Bible, we're referred to as Ethiopians. It's interesting because there's a prophecy in the Bible that says that Ethiopia will one day stretch its hand out to God. And what that suggests is that there was going to be a conversion to Hebrewism, or Judaism rather. But in fact, we know that there were many African Jews. If we doubt that, we can look at the book of Acts chapter 8. The eunuch, Candace's treasurer, was there during Pentecost to celebrate one of the high holy days. So he was already a converted Jew. And at the end of the story, we say that we see that he becomes a converted Christian. So we know that Christianity reached Africa early. We know that, for that matter, Judaism reached it even before that. So there's this interaction between Northeast Africa and Palestine and Levant, or what is modern-day Israel.
Who are the descendants of Kushites?
We covered that before. Short answer is that the people who live in modern-day Sudan and South Sudan are the descendants of the Kushites. But that's only a partial answer, because the fact is that throughout human history, and certainly African history, people have moved. During the time of the Kushite Empire, there were tribes, and there were different tribes that made up the empire of Kush, and there were different tribes that made up Sudan. One of the ancient tribes that lived in Kush was the Lua people. And we know that the Lua have migrated since then further south, back to Kenya, Uganda, and they have situated themselves around Lake Victoria. They are a tribe that typically make their living through fishing. We can say that they went there, or we could say more accurately that they returned there, because that region of the world, scientists tell us, is the cradle of humanity.
Do you have any closing thoughts about Kush for people to take away?
Yeah, Kush was a great empire. The people were great, and it's not like the people evaporated and went into thin air. They're still there right now. So you can see the Kushites, the descendants of the Kushites. But we're benefiting from the science and the religion and the military structure that they put into place thousands of years ago. I would say to the people of the academy that sponsors, pays for these summer digs, so to speak, these excavations of ancient lands, more resources and more attention needs to be paid to exploring and bringing back to life and recapturing the greatness that was once the Kushite Empire.